There must be a mistake. My mother cleaned houses. She had nothing.
Ma'am, do you know how much is in this account?
There must be a mistake, the girl whispered. My mother cleaned houses. She had nothing. The bank manager slid the statement across the desk with trembling hands. Ma'am, he said, barely above a whisper, do you know how much is in this account? Her knees nearly gave way when she saw the balance, but the money wasn't the biggest surprise. Attached to the account was a sealed letter with her name on it, written years before her mother died. To understand how a barefoot girl ended up standing in that cold marble hall, we have to go back 3 weeks, to the morning Amara buried the only person who had ever loved her. They lowered Adana into the red earth on a Tuesday, under a sky too dry to even give them rain to hide their tears. Amara stood at the grave's edge in a borrowed dress 2 sizes too big. Her mother had cleaned other people's houses for 22 years so her daughter could eat. And now the neighborhood had come, not to mourn, but to whisper. Beggars, they said behind their hands. What will that girl do now with no mother and no money? Amara heard every word and lifted her chin because if she looked down, she knew she would fall down. But none of them knew the thing already waiting for her across the city, a thing that would make every one of them ashamed of their words. That night, the landlord came. He did not knock softly, the way you knock for a girl who has just buried her mother. He banged, and when Amara opened the door, he pushed a paper into her hand. An eviction notice, 7 days, no mercy. Your mother owed 3 months, he said, eyes crawling over the small room. The dead don't pay rent. Find the money or find the road. He left her in the doorway with the paper shaking in her fingers. Amara looked around the only home she had ever known, the cracked wall, the mat, the small stool her mother used to sit on while braiding her hair, and asked herself the question that would change everything. Where does a poor girl even begin to look for money? She began where all the poor begin, with hope, and the little the dead leave behind. Amara emptied her mother's tin box onto the mat that night. Old buttons, a broken watch, a church program, and 2 things she could not explain. The first was a small brass locket on a worn string, one her mother had worn every single day and never once opened in front of her. The second was an old bank passbook, its cover soft with age, from a bank Amara had never seen her enter. Inside was only a name, an account number, and a date 20 years old. She held the locket in one hand and the passbook in the other, and something in her chest tightened, though she did not yet know why. What was a house cleaner doing with a bank account she had hidden for 20 years? But before the bank, there was a debt, which meant doing the one thing she dreaded most, asking the Okafers for her last wages. The Okafer mansion sat behind tall white gates in the richest part of the city, where the roads were smooth and the air smelled of flowers instead of gutters. Adana had cleaned that house for the last 2 years of her life. Now Amara stood in the heat, holding the house key her mother used to carry, and pressed the bell with a trembling finger. She did not know she was walking straight into the woman who destroyed her family before she was even born. The gate opened onto a garden party. White chairs, glass tables, women in bright lace, men in flowing abaya, the smell of jollof rice on the breeze. At the center stood Nikeka Okafor, widow of the late Chief Obina Okafor, draped in gold, her face powdered smooth, a glass in her hand. She saw the poor girl at the edge of her beautiful garden the way a person sees a stain on white cloth, and she smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Yes," she said, loud enough for every guest to turn. "Who let this in?" Amara held the key up so it caught the light. "Good afternoon, Ma. I am Adana's daughter. My mother cleaned here. She passed on. I only came for her last wages." The garden went quiet. Forks stopped. Phones came up. "La ha ha ha." "Her wages?" she laughed, a bright, cruel laugh that made 3 women near her laugh too, though they did not know why. "Her wages?" She stepped closer, heels clicking on the stone. "Look at what walked through my gate." She turned to her guests, arms wide, performing. "This is what happens when you are too kind to servants. Their children think they are owed something." "Please," Amara said, hating how small her voice came out. "Just what she earned." Neka reached into her gold purse, pulled out a few crumpled notes, and let them fall onto the wet grass at Amara's feet. "There, kneel in front of all my guests and pick it up, since that is all your family knows how to do, crawl for scraps." Somewhere a phone camera clicked. A woman covered her mouth, not to hide horror, but to hide a smile. The notes lay in the grass, soaking up the water, and Amara felt her throat close and her legs begin to shake. She looked at the money, then at the powdered, smiling face above her, and she made a decision that surprised even herself. She did not kneel. "Keep it," Amara said quietly, her voice steady even as her eyes burned. "My mother kneeled enough for this family. I won't." And she turned and walked out through the tall white gates with her back straight, the whispers rising like flies behind her. She did not cry until she was around the corner where no one could see. But what none of them knew was that the locket around her neck held a secret that would one day bring Nneka Okafor to her knees in that very same city. For now, Amara had 6 days before the road and a passbook from a bank she had never entered. The next morning, she washed her one clean dress, borrowed slippers, and set out to close whatever tiny account remained, praying there might be enough for a bus ticket and a week of food. She had no idea she was about to walk into the biggest shock of her life. The bank stood in the heart of the city, a great building of glass and cold white marble, the air conditioning hitting her skin like a cool river as the doors slid open. Amara had never been anywhere so grand, and she did not get far. A broad-shouldered guard in a gray uniform stepped into her path before she reached the counter, an old man with gray at his temples and a hard, tired face. His name tag read Jelani. "This way is not for you," Baba Jelani said flatly, looking her up and down, the faded dress, the borrowed slippers, the nervous hands. "Customers only. If you are looking for the market, it is behind." "I am a customer," Amara said, holding up the passbook. "My mother had an account here. She died. I came to close it." The guard's eyes flicked to the passbook, then to her face, and for just a moment, so fast she almost missed it, something crossed his features. A flinch, a shadow of recognition there and gone. He glanced at the account number, and his hard face changed. "Wait here," he said, quieter now, and walked to the counter to speak low to the teller. Why would a passbook make a bored security guard's hands go still at his sides? The young teller, a slim woman named Chinello, waved Amara over with a practiced smile. "Passbook and identification, please." Amara handed them over. Chinello typed the number in, still smiling. Then the smile fell off her face. She typed it again, leaned closer to the screen, her fingers stopping. "One moment," she said, her voice gone thin, and she stood so fast her chair rolled back and hit the wall. "Please sit." Amara sat on the edge of a leather chair in the middle of that vast marble hall, tiny in her faded blue dress and borrowed slippers, the passbook clutched in both hands on her lap, her heart pounding so loud she was sure the whole bank could hear it. Around her, well-dressed customers in suits and lace glanced over their shoulders. Then the manager's office door opened. Out came Mr. Tunde, a heavy man in a sharp navy suit and gold-rimmed glasses, and he was not walking calmly. He was hurrying, the printed statement shaking in his hand, his tie crooked as though he had stood up too fast. He stopped in front of the barefoot girl and looked down at her the way a man looks at something impossible. The whole hall seemed to hold its breath. "There must be a mistake," Amara whispered, staring up at him. "My mother cleaned houses. She had nothing. My mother cleaned floors. She—" And then the room went soft and gray at the edges, and she gripped the chair to keep from sliding out of it. How does a woman who scrubbed strangers' floors for 22 years die with a fortune in a secret account? Mr. Tunde called for water, and when Amara could breathe again, the manager said the words that turned shock into mystery. "There is more. The account has instructions attached, a sealed envelope in our vault to be given to the holder's child upon her death." He nodded to Chinello, who returned with a cream envelope yellowed at the corners. On the front, in her mother's careful hand, was one word: Amara. It has been in our vault for 11 years. Amara took it and stared at her own name. 11 years. Her mother had written this when she was still a small girl braiding grass dolls in the dust. What had Adana known all those years ago that she could not say to her daughter's face? She did not open it there. Her hands were shaking too badly, and something told her it was not meant to be read under the eyes of strangers. She held it to her chest and floated out past Baba Jelani, who watched her go with a look she could not read, his old eyes following the envelope. She had walked in a beggar. She was walking out with a fortune and a letter from the dead. For one shining hour, she let herself believe all her troubles were over. She was wrong. They had not even begun. Because money like that does not sit quietly in the dark. The moment Chinello's fingers touched that account, a silent alarm rang somewhere Amara could not see. A file the bank had flagged years before, connected to one of the richest families in the city. By the time she reached home, a phone was already ringing in the Okafor mansion, and the woman who had let those wet notes fall into the grass at her feet was about to learn that the ragged girl she humiliated was now sitting on a fortune. What does a woman like Nneka Okafor do when she smells money she believes should be hers? She strikes, fast, and from behind. 2 days later, when Amara returned with the sealed envelope still unopened in her bag, too afraid, too hopeful, she was met not with a smile, but an apology. "I am very sorry," Mr. Tunde said, unable to meet his eyes. "The account has been frozen. This morning, a legal claim was filed. I cannot release a single coin until the court decides." Amara's stomach dropped. "Frozen? By who? My mother left it to me." He slid a document across the desk. At the top, in bold black letters, was the name of the person contesting the account, Mrs. Nneka Okafor. The claim said the money was stolen, that Adana, a lowly cleaner, had spent years quietly robbing the Okafor family. Amara read the word thief 3 times before it truly cut her. Her mother, a thief. How do you fight a lie told by someone who owns half the city? The story spread before the ink was dry. By the next market day, everyone in the neighborhood had heard it. The cleaner Adana had been a secret thief, and her daughter was trying to run with stolen riches. The women who had whispered beggar now whispered criminal. A trader refused to sell her rice. A boy she had grown up with crossed to the other side of the road. Grief was heavy enough. Grief plus a shame she had not earned bent her double at night. And yet, alone on her mat with the eviction days away, Amara did something the Okafors had not counted on. She stopped crying. She sat up, and she began, quietly, to plan. She was poor, but not stupid, and she knew one thing for certain: her mother was no thief. So where had the money come from, and why did Nneka move so fast to bury it? Into this storm walked a man in a fine suit, carrying a soft leather bag and a warm, fatherly smile. He found Amara waiting in the heat outside the bank and introduced himself as Barrister Kalu. "I heard about your situation, my child. A terrible injustice, a poor girl robbed of her mother's memory by powerful people." He pressed a card into her hand. "I want to help you. No fee. I only want justice done." Hope rose in her chest like a warm tide. Finally, someone on her side. She thanked him with tears in her eyes. She did not know that some hands that reach for a drowning girl are only there to push her under. Who really sent Barrister Kalu? That night, alone by the light of a small lamp, Amara finally found the courage to open her mother's sealed envelope. Inside were pages covered in her mother's careful, tired handwriting, the same hand that had signed her school reports. And as she read, the whole world she thought she knew began to crack. "My Amara,
If you are reading this, I am gone and can no longer protect you with silence, so now I must protect you with the truth. We are not who this city believes we are. I was not born a cleaner. I chose to become one, to hide.
To keep you safe from a family that would rather see us in the ground than let us claim what is ours. Her breath caught. She read on, hands shaking. The money is not stolen. It was given by a man who spent his last years trying to undo a great wrong. His name. And there the page ended. She turned it over. She reached for the next page, but the next page was not there. The letter stopped mid-sentence at the single most important word. Someone, long ago, had removed the final page. Who had taken it, and what name had Adana been about to write? Amara searched the envelope, the tin box, the whole room until the lamp burned low. Nothing. The truth had been in her hands and broke off at the very edge of the answer. And then her eyes fell on the one thing she had not searched, the brass locket her mother had worn every day and never opened. She had always assumed it was empty. Now, with shaking fingers, she tried to open it. It was rusted shut with age and sweat and years. She pried at it until her fingers ached and it would not give. She pressed the locket to her lips and made a promise to the dark. I will find out who we are. But she was running out of time, and her new enemy was moving faster than she knew. The next morning, Barrister Kalu had wonderful news. I have found a witness, he told Amara, beaming, a retired estate manager who worked for the Okafris. He will testify that your mother was given that money legally, as a gift. We will win. Amara wept with relief. For the first time in weeks, she slept without fear, dreaming of clearing her mother's name and standing tall in that neighborhood again. She trusted Barrister Kalu completely now, and that was exactly the mistake he had been made to create. Because the barrister with the fatherly smile was not working for Amara at all. Every word she spoke to him went straight into the gold-ringed ears of Nneka Okafor. So when the first hearing came, Amara walked in believing she had a witness, a lawyer, and a chance. She had none of the three. The courtroom was full. The Okafors had made sure of it. Friends, society women, journalists Nneka had invited to watch the thief's daughter exposed. Amara sat on a hard bench in her one good dress, the locket at her neck, the letter in her bag, her heart hammering. Nneka swept in wrapped in deep purple lace and did not even look at her. She looked through her as though she were empty air. And when the judge asked Barrister Kalu to present his witness, the lawyer rose slowly, cleared his throat, and said the words that dropped the floor out from under Amara's feet. Your Honor, I am withdrawing from this case. He did not even glance at her. Further review has convinced the Okafor family's claim has merit. There will be no witness. A gasp went through the courtroom. Amara turned to him, her mouth open, her whole body going cold. What are you doing? You said we would win. Barrister Kalu buttoned his fine jacket, lifted his bag, and walked past her toward the Okafor bench, where Nneka gave him the smallest of nods. In that single moment, Amara understood everything. The kind stranger, the free help, the witness that appeared and vanished. He had never been hers. He had been theirs from the very first smile, sent to learn her secrets and leave her defenseless at the exact moment she needed defending. She sat alone, abandoned before 100 watching faces, and Nneka finally turned to look at her and smiled that same cruel smile from the garden. How does a penniless girl fight a family that can buy even her own lawyer? The judge, seeing the girl had no counsel, was preparing to rule. And then Nneka's lawyers played their final card. They produced a letter, a confession, they said, written in Adana's own hand, admitting she had stolen from the Okafor family over many years. They passed it to the judge, then to the journalists. The handwriting looked exactly like Adana's, the same careful loops Amara had grown up seeing. My client's late husband was too soft-hearted to prosecute a servant, the lead lawyer announced. But the truth is here in the thief's own words. The courtroom murmured and stared at Amara with open disgust. Even the judge's face hardened. It was over. The lie became truth printed on paper, and no one believed the ragged girl over the powerful widow.
Amara felt the tears finally break loose, not of weakness, but of pure, helpless rage. And yet, as she stared at that confession waved in the air, something snagged in her mind. Something about that letter was wrong. She just couldn't yet see what. It was a young man who saw it first.
He had been sitting quietly at the back, a notebook on his knee. Kofi, a junior law clerk who did legal aid for people who could not pay, the kind who came to watch big cases to learn how the powerful bent the law. He had come to observe. He had stayed because of the girl who would not stop holding her head up even when the whole room had decided she was guilty. Now he stood, uninvited, and asked the judge for 1 minute. "That confession," Kofi said, his voice cracking but pushing on. "What amount does it confess to stealing?" Annoyed, the lawyers read it out, the exact amount, the full fortune, down to the last figure. Kofi turned to the courtroom, his hands shaking but his words steady. "Then it is a forgery. That exact amount was not in the account until after Adana was already dead. A dead woman cannot confess to a balance that did not yet exist while she lived." The room went silent as a grave, and on the Okafor bench, for the first time, Neka's smile flickered. The judge frowned and demanded the bank records. It was true. The account had received a final large deposit after Adana's death. The confession claimed she had stolen the full amount, but that amount had not existed while she was alive. Someone had written it recently, copying her handwriting, and made one arrogant mistake. They used the current balance instead of the old one. Whoever forged it saw the account only after the final deposit landed, and only two kinds of people had, the bank and the person who filed the claim. The judge's eyes lifted slowly to Neka Okafor. "Madame, who prepared this document?" In the ringing silence, Amara realized she was no longer the only one on trial. But a suspicious date alone was not proof, and Neka's lawyers were already explaining it away. What Amara needed was the one thing still locked inside a rusted brass locket. The judge, unwilling to rule on a single strange date, adjourned the case for 1 week and ordered the account to stay frozen. Not victory, but not defeat. Amara walked out past a wall of cameras, and Kofi caught up with her on the steps. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "You don't even know me." He shrugged, suddenly shy. "I know that woman has been crushing people like us my whole life, and I know a forgery when I see one. My father lost his land to people like her." He looked at the locket at her throat. "Your mother's missing page. If we find what it was going to say, we can end this. Do you have anything of hers she kept close?" And Amara's hand rose slowly to the brass locket. For the first time in weeks, she was no longer alone against the tide. But time was short, and Neka Okafor did not intend to lose twice. That night, Neka made her final and most ruthless move. If she could not win in the courtroom, she would win before the case returned to it. She filed an emergency motion. Since a confession exists and the girl has no proof and no lawyer, the account should be closed and transferred into Okafor guardianship. And to make sure the girl could never fight back, she sent men to Amara's emptied home while she was out, not to harm her, the Okafors were too clever for that, but to find and destroy the original letter and anything else that might prove the truth. When Amara returned that evening, her door hung open, the tin box overturned, and the sealed envelope with the precious pages was gone. Everything her mother had left her had been taken, except the one thing she now never took off her own neck. Her hand flew to the locket. It was still there, but without the letter, without a lawyer, with the account about to be signed away, what could one rusted locket do against the richest woman in the city? It could do everything, because the answer had never been in the letter. Kofi came before dawn, and by lamplight they worked at the locket together, patient now, warming it, working a drop of oil into the seam his grandmother had taught him. At last, with a soft click, it opened. Inside were two things, folded so small that a lifetime of body heat had sealed them. The first was a tiny cracked photograph.
The second was a scrap of paper worn soft as cloth, the missing final page of Adana's letter, torn small and hidden in the one place no thief would think to look, against her heart. Amara unfolded it with breath held, and there in her mother's hand was the end of the sentence that had haunted her for weeks. His name was Chief Obinna Okafor, my father.
Your grandfather. I am his firstborn daughter, cast out and called dead by his wife so her own son could inherit everything. The money is not stolen, Amara. It is your birthright, given back in secret by an old man dying with regret. The lamp trembled in her hand. She was not a beggar. She was not a thief's daughter. She was the granddaughter of Chief Obinna Okafor, the true and rightful heir to the very fortune Nneka had spent 20 years trying to keep. And the woman who dropped notes in the grass at her feet was no stranger at all. She was the stepmother who had erased her family. What would happen when Amara walked back into that courtroom, no longer a servant's child, but the blood of the man they all bowed to? The photograph told the rest. It showed a young Adana, perhaps 20, beside a tall, proud man in a chief's cap, Chief Obinna himself, his hand on her shoulder, both of them smiling. On the back, in the same careful hand, Papa and me, before she turned him against me. And Amara finally understood her mother's whole hidden life, a daughter of wealth, falsely accused by a jealous stepmother, disowned, driven into poverty, choosing to raise her child as a cleaner rather than risk that woman's reach, until the old chief in his final years secretly found his lost daughter and grandchild and poured his fortune into an account in her name, trying to undo the wrong before death took him. He had died before he could say it aloud. Nneka had made sure of that too, but she had never imagined the truth would survive, folded inside a servant's locket against a dead woman's heart, and Amara knew exactly what to do with it. When the court reconvened, the room was fuller than before. Word had spread that the thief's daughter would be finished today. Nneka arrived in white, radiant, already victorious in her own mind, and into that room walked Amara, but not the trembling girl they remembered. Her one good dress was clean and pressed, her back straight, Kofi at her side with a thin folder, the locket bright at her throat. She asked the judge to present new evidence before the account was transferred. Nneka laughed openly. What evidence could this child possibly have? And that public laugh was the last mistake she would ever make in that courtroom, because Amara laid 3 things on the table: the recovered final page of Adana's letter, the photograph of Adana with Chief Obinna, and, thanks to Kofi's night in the legal aid archives, the bank's own record showing every deposit had come directly from Chief Obinna Okafor's private funds in his final years. Not stolen, given, by the family patriarch himself. The courtroom erupted, and now came the reveal that changed how every person saw all that had come before. The judge examined the photograph, the letter, the deposit records, then asked the question that would break the Okafor empire in 2. Mrs. Okafor, is this woman, Adana, the late chief's daughter whom this family declared dead 20 years ago? Nneka's mouth opened, but for the first time in her life, no smooth words came. Her powdered face seemed to crack. Her hands, heavy with gold rings, began to shake. She reached for the table to steady herself and missed it. That is a lie," she whispered, but her voice had lost all its power. "The girl was cast out for stealing." "By whom?" the judge pressed. "Who accused her? And who," he lifted the forged confession, "recently wrote this, using a balance that did not exist after the woman's death?" In the silence that followed, every eye turned at last from the poor girl to the rich widow. The mask had fallen. Everyone could see it now. Then, a voice spoke from the Okafor bench that no one expected. Io Okafor stood, Nneka's own son, the one the whole scheme had been built to enrich. He had been silent through all of it, growing paler with each word, and now he could not look at his mother. "Stop," he said. "Please, just stop." He turned to the judge. "I found papers in my father's study after he died. He wrote to a lawyer about restoring his daughter, about a granddaughter. Neka took them and told me to forget I ever saw them. I obeyed because I was afraid my whole life." His voice broke. "But I will not steal from my own blood. That girl is my niece. Everything in that account is hers." He sat down heavily and put his face in his hands. The seeming heir had chosen truth over fortune, and with those words, Neka Okafor was utterly and finally alone. For one moment, just one, the courtroom saw the truth behind the monster, and it was almost enough to understand her. "You want to know why?" Neka said, rising, her voice shaking with a lifetime of buried fear. "I came into that family with nothing. They never let me forget it. A poor girl who married up, always one step from being sent back to the gutter I came from. When the old man's daughter stood to inherit, I saw my son left with scraps and myself thrown away. So I chose my child. I did what I had to do so we would never be poor again." Her chin lifted, defiant even now, and for a heartbeat, the room felt the fear that had driven her. But then everyone remembered the notes falling into the grass, the word thief on a dead woman, the forged confession, a child raised in poverty so this woman could sleep on gold. Fear can explain a person. It cannot excuse burying a family alive. Amara looked at her and felt not hatred now, but something colder. "My mother scrubbed floors for 22 years so that I would never have to do what you did. That is the difference between us." Neka had no answer. There was none. The rest came quickly, the way things do once a lie finally breaks. The judge ordered the account unfrozen and released in full to Amara, the rightful heir, and opened a formal inquiry into the forged confession, the false accusation that had disowned Adana decades before, and Barrister Kalu, who had sold out his own client. She who had ruled by reputation would now be ruined by it. By morning, every society woman who had laughed in her garden would be whispering her name the way they once whispered Amara's. The widow walked out into a city that had turned its back on her, and she walked out alone, because even her own son could not follow her. Amara did not smile as she watched her go. She simply breathed. A long, slow breath she felt as though she had been holding her whole life. Outside, the cameras that had come to film a thief's daughter now filmed an heiress, but Amara did not stop for them. She found a quiet corner in the shade and opened the little locket one more time, looking at the young face of her mother beside the grandfather she would now never meet. "We're not hiding anymore, Mama. You can rest." Kofi stood a little way off, giving her the moment, and when she looked up and found him there, the young man who had risen for a stranger when the whole room wanted her to fall, she managed the first real smile in a very long time. It was not the fortune that had saved her, nor even the law. It was one old locket worn against a mother's heart and two people who had refused to kneel. Amara used the first of that money not for herself. She cleared her mother's rent debt and gave the small home to the widow next door who had once slipped her bread when she had none. She paid, quietly, for old Baba Jelani to retire, for she had learned he once worked at the Okafor estate, had known her mother, and had recognized the account number the moment he saw it, and had said nothing only because an old man's word was worth nothing against the Okafors, yet had watched over her in small, silent ways ever since. And with the rest, she built something her mother would have wept to see. A home where the daughters of house cleaners and market women could go to school in clean uniforms and never once be told they did not belong. She named it after Adana, because a woman had knelt on strangers' floors for 22 years, hiding a fortune and a truth and a whole stolen life so that her daughter could one day stand up straight in a marble hall and refuse to pick money off the grass. And she had. And now, so would 1,000 girls after her. The manager had come out shaking and asked, "Do you know how much is in this account?" In the end, the answer was so much more than money. It was a name given back, a mother's honor restored, a grandfather's last wish granted, and a poor girl who walked in barefoot and walked out the richest kind of rich there is. Free, unashamed, and finally home.